So the when the World Wide Web just came out, okay, the underlying architecture was that you had a browser and you had a server here, and the server was hosting some static pages, and because they were static, the original design was that the browser would request for this document, and the browser would read the document and then send it over to the browser. And because it was static, it made sense that there was no need for the server to remember anything, right? When you ask for the same document, the expectation that is that you would get exactly the same document. Yes? There was nothing changed over time. Okay. Now, when the World Wide Web was opened up to a wider audience, people started playing around with this and said, "Ooh, wouldn't it be great if this could be, instead of being static, it could be calculated, right? It could be computed. Meaning, it'd be great if I could run some code here and generate this dynamically." And we added all sorts of ways that we could parameterize this. We could pass in maybe a zip code, and depending on the zip code, I could calculate what the weather was at that zip code, and then this would be different for you than it would be different from someone else, right? Depending on the if two folks came with a different zip code, they would get different pages. Yes, and we've been doing that. We know how to do that. We can parameterize the data, and we can run server side. Now, some people kept going and say, "Well, this is great that it's dynamic. If two folks come with different zip codes, they would get different outputs. That's great. But I'm sick and tired of having to type this zip code all the time. Would it be nice if it would remember, right, next time I come around that it's the same zip code as yesterday, right? Can't you remember that it's me? It's the same person." So there was nothing in the protocol, in the HTTP original protocol, that would support that feature for the server to be able to remember anything. Okay, it was entirely a stateless protocol. Right? We often hear that HTTP is a stateless protocol. Right? So to deal with this issue, they invented a mechanism that would allow the server to be able to remember between sessions, right? So for every call that would come in, right, the server would be able to distinguish that it's still you. I'm having a conversation. Before this, all these conversations were stateless. It would be like talking to someone that didn't remember with Alzheimer's, right? That you say something, and the next question they would think that they wouldn't remember from the previous conversation. It would be very frustrating. So to be able for this to have a conversation, there needs to be memory, being able to remember that it's still, what is the context? That you have a different context here than a different context over there. So to support this, they invented a mechanism called cookies. So cookies is a mechanism where the browser and the server come to an agreement, right? That beyond the HTTP protocol, in the header of the HTTP request, the browser and the server come to an agreement that the server is going to check to see if the browser is sending any information, any identifiable information, for the server to be able to distinguish between two different servers, between two different browsers. So the agreement is the following: the browser, when it goes to a particular domain, right? It goes to a particular domain, and the domain is abc.com. Okay. Before it goes on to the server, it looks at this locally in its own file system in a cache and sees, do I have anything for abc.com, for that domain? If I don't have anything, in particular cookies, if I don't have any cookies, and it would be typical if it's the very first time that I'm hitting this server, I don't have anything stored for abc.com. So I go here and I pass no cookies, right? The server looks at the header and sees that the cookie header is empty. It's not there. There's no header for the cookies. Right? So the server says, oh, okay, this must be the very first time that you ever come here. Right? Because you're not passing any cookies. So the server does its thing, and in its response, it provides, in the headers of the response, it provides a cookie. It provides some unique identifier. It could be random, it could be a piece of text, it could be anything. It's generated programmatically by the server, by your program. You decide what the cookie wants to be. It could be some generic, unique identifier, just 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. As long as you know, right, that you generated it, right, and in somewhere in your database, you're keeping track of some table saying that 1, 2, 3, 4, you're going to use it as a key into some data that you can store. Okay? Right? So the 1, 2, 3 comes here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the browser says if the browser is accepting cookies, it'll go and store it for that domain. It will store the value that the server set to store in there. Right? And the browser doesn't care what the actual data is being stored. Okay? It only matters the next time that the browser makes another request. This time, it has a cookie for it. In the headers, it'll provide the same cookie that the server gave it, right? And sends it to the server. The server says, "Ooh, yeah, I know I generated that cookie. Let's see what I have for it." Okay? And it could be some data that it allows it to remember things. It could be a shopping cart. It could be whatever your program decides, right, to put, right, as data for that key. Does that make sense? Right? And it could be that in this request might be that you're adding some shoes to your shopping cart, and so your server is gonna take that cookie, look at some key, probably in RAM, stored in RAM. Could be also in a database. You could decide how you want to do it, and it adds this could be an array, and it adds objects to that array. If someone else is also participating in this, they might get a different cookie, right? To some other cookie, and it's stored here abc.com. So that other cookie 2, 3, 4, 5. So in this way, we can participate, and the server can remember different things for different users. That makes sense? Right? So this is the core mechanism by which session management is implemented. Right? Underneath all session management mechanisms, there's this very low level cookie mechanism. Right? Now there's some APIs that wrap this very low level cookie mechanism and provide a little higher level API. Okay? One of them is the session API, which we'll see in a minute. Right? Instead of having to deal with individual cookies, the session API hides all that from you. Right? It uses random cookies to go back and forth. Those cookies are oftentimes referred to as session IDs. Session IDs, right? And these typically are some unique identifier, right? That should not be able to be replicated, right? It's a unique identifier that is used back and forth, and that the session API uses it to keep track of some object in RAM, and keeps track underneath. It uses the ID unbeknownst to you, right? It's all hidden from you, and it gives you APIs such as session.put or session.get, okay, or session.clear. And so it creates an API for you to be able to store things into this object, to retrieve things from the object, to be able to clear it and just erase everything that was ever stored in there, right? And underneath, it keeps track of the session ID for you. You don't have to keep track of it, right? It automatically does this, and it hides it, providing this high-level API on top of it. That makes sense? Right? And this is supported by all major servers Node.js servers certainly, but obviously .NET servers, Java servers, they all support, PHP servers, they all support some high-level API that allows you to store things in the session, retrieve things from the session, and I'd like to demonstrate that for you in Node.js.